Everett Michael Burns, and the name itself feels like a lie. A name that belongs to a boy who lived and died a lifetime ago. It's a name that has been stretched and worn thin over 125 years. You've carried it through a century of unimaginable change. A century you never asked for. And every day is another agonizing turn of the screw. Another slow-moving, unending moment in a life that should have ended long ago. You can feel the weight of it, the sheer impossible burden of 125 years, in the creaking of your bones and the tremor in your hands. This body is a testament to something unnatural, something that has no right to exist, and the proof of its impossible longevity lies right here in the envelope. All the documentation you have to prove it. You have carried that envelope like a curse for as long as you can remember. A constant, tangible reminder of a truth that defies all logic and reason. Today, you live on the southern edge of the Redwoods Forest in California, a place of ancient, silent majesty. It is a fitting location for a man so old, a ghost among giants. The air here is cold and clean, smelling of damp earth and pine, and it fills your lungs with a sense of quiet resignation. You came here to disappear, to become a whisper on the wind, a forgotten name in a quiet corner of the earth. But some things you've learned you can't outrun. The past is not a place. It is a living, breathing thing that follows you, whispering in the quiet of the night, reminding you of the debt you owe. And that is why you are writing these letters now. After more than 100 years of silence, the words are finally ready to break free. Your existence here is a solitary one, a life of quiet reflection and unbearable memory. The great, ancient trees stand guard over you, their immense height a constant symbol of a scale of time you know all too well. They were saplings when you were a boy, and you have watched them grow, reaching for the sky as you were left behind, rooted in a past you can't escape. You watch the sun rise and set over the same horizon 100,000 times over. You feel the cold of 100,000 winters in your bones, the heat of 100,000 summers in your blood. There is no novelty left, only the relentless, grinding march of time and the slow decay of everything you once held dear. Every face you knew, every hand you held, every voice you loved, they have all turned to dust, and you are the only one left to remember them. It is the loneliest prison imaginable, and you have sentenced yourself to it. You were not born here, in this cold, magnificent forest. Your roots are in the sandy soil and whispering pines of another place entirely. You were born and raised in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, in a town that time has since swallowed whole. Leeds Point, they called it. Now, it's just a wide spot on the road, a forgotten mark on a map, but in your mind, it is as vivid as yesterday. You remember the sound of that name on your father's lips, the warmth of your mother's kitchen, the scent of pine needles and salt air. You remember the simple rhythm of life in 1903, a rhythm that was shattered by a single moment of impossible horror. You've held your tongue for a very long time, for over 100 years, about what happened there. The shame of it, the terror of it, the guilt. It all coiled around your tongue and choked the words before they could escape. You chose to live with it, to let the weight of the secret turn you into this husk of a man, rather than to speak it aloud and face the consequences. You kept your mouth shut, afraid that if you spoke of any of it, you would not only be a pariah, but you would break the fragile peace you had purchased at such a terrible price. But now, the silence has become a tomb, and you find you can no longer lie here and breathe. It is time for you to break that silence, to put the truth on paper, to finally tell the story you have carried for so long. The reason is simple. You tell yourself as you clutch the pen so hard your knuckles turn white. A debt you owe is finally due. It is a debt that was a bargain struck in the summer of 1903. A bargain that seemed so simple at the time, but has since proven to be the very foundation of your unending torment. You were just a boy of 16 then, with only the simple cares of a girl down the street, and where your next nickel was coming from. You knew nothing of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of your world. You knew nothing of the things that fly under the sun, things that belong only in forgotten lore and whispered tales. You were innocent, naive, and you made a choice that would cost you everything. A choice you have been paying for every single day since. You were a boy of dreams and simple pleasures. You found joy in wandering out in the pine thickets, hunting squirrels, and fishing in the several brooks that ran through your daddy's 59 acres. You and your girl, Abigail, would go together sometimes, and you would sit in the tops of the trees and ride out the occasional afternoon thunderstorm, giggling and stealing a kiss now and then. It was a world of simple happiness, of a future that felt as certain as the rising sun, a future that was taken from you in a single, terrible, unforgettable moment. And so you write now, pouring the words onto this page, hoping that whoever finds them will understand the unspeakable burden of a life that has been so cruelly stretched, so horribly prolonged, all because of a single, desperate moment of love and loss. The world you remember wasn't a wide, open expanse of possibility, but a small, perfect circle, and its center was the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. You remember it not as the wide spot on the road it is now, but as a living, breathing world, a place of rustling secrets and sun-dappled glades. The town of Leeds Point was your whole universe, a small gathering of houses and people who knew your name. The air itself was different then. It had the sharpness of pine needles and the damp sweetness of the sandy earth beneath your feet. It was the summer of 1903, and you were just 16 years old, with the kind of boundless energy that only youth can possess. You were in that golden moment of life, a brief, shining instant where your only cares were a girl down the street, and where your next nickel was coming from. You knew nothing of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of your world, nothing of the impossible debts that could be called due. Your days were a blissful, ignorant rhythm. A simple melody played out under a bright sun. Your life was a simple one, bounded by the routines of a farmer's boy. The sun dictated your day, rising to the chores and setting to a hard-earned rest. You had your duties, helping your daddy feed the few cows you had. But your heart was in the woods, out in the pine thickets that sprawled across your daddy's 59 acres. That land was your kingdom. The pine thickets were a labyrinth of green and brown, their scent a sweet and earthy perfume. You knew every path, every hidden nook, every creek bed. It was there you learned to hunt the squirrels that chattered in the branches, your aim true with a slingshot, your ears tuned to the sounds of the forest. The woods taught you patience and the subtle art of stillness, of becoming a part of the landscape rather than an intruder in it. You would spend hours out there, just you and the silent pines, feeling a sense of peace that you would never again experience. It was in those same woods that you learned the art of fishing, the quiet patience of waiting by the several brooks that ran through the property, watching the water for a flicker of movement. The cold, clear water would numb your fingers as you held the line, but the promise of a fish on the end made it all worthwhile. You would sit on the bank, a wicker basket at your side, listening to the gentle gurgle of the water as it ran over the smooth stones. Time had no meaning there. You were a boy, and the world was endless, a beautiful, sunlit tapestry with no end in sight. You would fill that basket with a handful of fish, enough for a meal, and walk home at dusk, the scent of pine and fresh fish clinging to your clothes. It was a life of simple, honest satisfaction, a life you foolishly believed would last forever. But even those simple pleasures were secondary to her. Abigail, the girl down the street, her name, even after all this time, still feels like a whisper on your lips, a secret you've kept buried for 100 years. She was a constant presence in your thoughts, the center of your universe. Your spare time could be found wandering out in the pine thickets, but that time was always better when she was there with you. Sometimes Abigail and you would go together, and the woods, which had always felt like your own private sanctuary, now felt like a shared home, a place where your two worlds could meet and become one. You would talk for hours about everything and nothing, your voices soft against the rustle of the leaves, your hands brushing against each other as you walked. The forest became the backdrop to your young love, a silent witness to your whispered promises and shared dreams. You and Abigail would sit in the tops of the trees and ride out the occasional afternoon thunderstorm. You would climb high, finding a perch on a thick branch where you felt safe and secure, as if nothing in the world could touch you there. The wind would whip around you, the rain would fall in sheets, and the thunder would rumble a deep, guttural beat. But you were safe. You were together, and that was all that mattered. You would cling to each other, laughing at the sheer power of nature, feeling like you were the only two people left in the world. Once in a while, you would dare to steal a kiss, a quick, soft peck on her lips, and Abigail would always giggle, the sound as bright and clear as the raindrops on the leaves. It was a sound you've replayed in your mind 1,000,000 times, a sound that has become a ghost of its former self, a faint echo in the endless halls of your memory. In those moments, you knew with a happy certainty that you could marry her when you both turned 18. Just like tons of other folks back then, it was a simple, beautiful plan, a future you took for granted. You had no way of knowing that on July 3rd of that bastard of a summer, you would lose her. Love is a strange, powerful thing, especially when you are young and know nothing of the world. It's an unstoppable force, a certainty that feels as solid and real as the ground beneath your feet. Your love for Abigail was like that, a feeling that ran so deep it felt like it was part of the very air you breathed. It wasn't a question of if, but of when. You were going to be together forever, and you both knew it. You never even considered the possibility of a world without her. It was as unthinkable as the sun not rising in the morning. She was your moon and your stars, the gentle anchor that kept you grounded in a world that was just beginning to open its doors to you. And in the summer of 1903, that world was still a beautiful, uncomplicated place. A place that smelled of sweetgrass and wild roses. A place where a boy and a girl could get lost in the woods and find their way home in each other's eyes. There was a shared language between you, a silent understanding that only comes with a deep and abiding connection. You didn't need words to communicate. A look, a touch, the way she would lean her head against your shoulder. It was a conversation all its own. She understood the simple dreams you had, the yearning for a life of your own, a small farm on the edge of town, a place to call your own. She shared those dreams, and they became your collective future, a tapestry you were both weaving with every shared moment. You would talk about it, lying on your backs in the pine thickets, looking up at the impossibly blue sky. You would build a life out of words and daydreams, a life that felt so real you could almost reach out and touch it. You could see the little white farmhouse with the picket fence, the vegetable garden in the back, the children that would one day run through the yard. It was a beautiful, peaceful vision, a promise of a future you were both so sure of. The Pine Barrens themselves were a metaphor for your life then, wild and a bit untamed on the surface, but with a deep, quiet beauty hidden within. You would spend hours in those woods, not just to hunt or fish, but just to be with each other. You would lie in the sun-dappled glades, the scent of pine and damp earth filling your senses, and talk for hours about everything and nothing. You would talk about the future you were building, the little details of the life you would one day share. You would talk about the past you had, the memories you had already made. And sometimes you would just lie in comfortable silence, the unspoken knowledge of your love filling the space between you. It was a perfect, uncomplicated, and pure love, the kind that only happens once in a lifetime. a fragile flame that you believed would burn forever. One of your fondest memories, one that is as sharp and clear as if it happened yesterday, is of you and Abigail riding out a thunderstorm in the tops of the trees. You would find a sturdy old oak tree, one with low, thick branches, and you would climb high, finding a perch where you felt safe and secure. The storms in the Pine Barrens could be violent, a sudden onslaught of wind and rain and thunder. The world would turn gray and angry. The trees would sway and groan, and the rain would fall in sheets, blurring the world into a wash of gray. But up in that tree, you were safe. You were together, and that was all that mattered. You would cling to each other, the raw power of the storm all around you, feeling a sense of invincibility. You would laugh at the sheer ferocity of the wind, the thunder, a deep, guttural beat, the lightning, a brilliant, fleeting flash. You would steal a kiss, a quick, soft peck on her lips, and her giggling would feel like a little bit of sunshine in the midst of the storm. You can still hear that giggle, even after all these years. It is a ghost in your memory, a faint echo of a happiness you will never again know. It is a sound that has haunted you for over 100 years, a constant reminder of what you lost. It is a sound that has become a symbol of a time before the darkness, a time before the bargain, a time when your only care was the girl you loved and the certainty of a shared future. You believed that nothing could ever come between you, that your love was a force so powerful it could withstand anything. You believed that you were invincible, that your love was a shield against the cruelties of the world. But you were just a boy, and she was just a girl, and you were both so terribly, terribly wrong. The world is a much darker place than you ever knew, and some things, you would soon learn, are far more powerful than love. Some things have been around for a very long time, and they don't give a damn about your little dreams. The day before tragedy struck, July 2nd, 1903, was a day so mundane, so ordinary, that it felt like a deliberate deception. It was a perfectly average day, the kind you would have lived 1,000 times over without a second thought. The sun rose, a gentle wash of pink and orange over the horizon, and the air was still and cool, smelling of damp earth and the hint of morning mist. It was a day that started like any other, a slow, deliberate rhythm of chores and quiet moments. There was no sense of impending doom, no feeling of a world about to turn on its head. It was just a day, a simple, beautiful day, a moment of perfect peace before the world came crashing down. Your day began with the familiar routines of a farmer's boy. You woke up with the sun, the first light of dawn filtering through your bedroom window, a gentle and natural alarm clock. The first order of business was always the cows. You would stumble out of bed, still half asleep, and make your way to the barn. The cool morning air a sharp shock against your skin. The scent of hay and cattle was a familiar, comforting smell. The sound of their lowing, a gentle greeting. You would feed them, the heavy sacks of grain, a familiar weight on your shoulders, and you would talk to them. A quiet, one-sided conversation that was as much a part of the routine as the feeding itself. You knew each one by name, a small, personal connection to the animals that were a part of your family's life. After the cows were fed and watered, it was time for your horse, Zip. Zip was more than just a horse. He was your companion, your friend, a beautiful bay with a gentle spirit. You would brush him, the rhythmic strokes of the brush a calming, meditative act, and you would talk to him, telling him about your day, about Abigail, about your dreams for the future. He would listen, his big, brown eyes intelligent and understanding, and you would feel a sense of peace that you rarely found anywhere else. You would feed him a handful of oats, the warm, sweet smell a pleasure to your senses, and you would saddle him up for the ride into town, a ritual you performed almost every day. The ride into town was a chance to clear your head, to feel the wind in your hair and the sun on your face. The road was a simple dirt track, rutted and bumpy, but you knew every twist and turn. The landscape was a familiar, comforting sight, a mix of open fields and dense pine thickets, and you felt a sense of belonging that was as deep and real as the land itself. The world was alive with the sounds of the day, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hawk. It was a world you knew, a world you loved, a world you believed would always be there, just as it was. The town of Leeds Point was a small, bustling hub of activity. The general store was the center of it all, a place where people gathered to catch up on the latest news, to gossip about their neighbors, to just pass the time. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where a stranger stood out like a sore thumb. You would tie Zip to the post outside, the familiar scent of wood and dust and sweat filling the air, and you would walk inside, the jingle of the bell on the door announcing your arrival. The air inside was thick with the smells of coffee, molasses, and old paper, a comforting scent you can still remember today. You would get your list of groceries for your mother, a small, handwritten piece of paper with a few simple items on it: a sack of flour, some sugar, a few pounds of salt pork. The store owner, a man named Mr. Abernathy, would always have a kind word for you, a quick chat about the weather or the state of the crops. It was a moment of connection, a small human interaction that was a part of the fabric of your life. You would pay for the items, the coins a familiar weight in your hand, and you would turn to leave, ready to get back to the simple, peaceful rhythm of your day. You had no way of knowing that this simple, mundane moment was about to be shattered, that your perfect, peaceful world was about to be turned inside out by a single, terrifying encounter. You were just a boy on a perfectly ordinary day, completely oblivious to the shadow that was about to fall over your life. It was a day so mundane that even the small pieces of news felt trivial, a quiet whisper in the background of a perfectly ordinary life. You had just paid for your groceries and were making your way out of the store. The jingle of the bell on the door, a familiar sound. You were holding the small brown paper bag with your mother's list of items. The simple weight of it, a symbol of the simple life you lived. As you stepped out into the bright sunshine, you saw it, the front page of the newspaper, pinned to the notice board by a simple thumbtack. The headline was not a banner of war or a declaration of a new invention, but a small, sad piece of news about a man you had never met. The headline was about Eid Delahanty, a name you recognized from the occasional chatter about baseball that made its way to your small town. He was a famous baseball player, a slugger, a star of the game. The headline read something to the effect of Eid Delahanty is dead, a blunt and sorrowful statement. You read the small accompanying article, your eyes scanning the words, a story of a man, a talented player, who had been found dead in the Niagara River. The details were hazy, a mix of speculation and rumor, but the conclusion was clear. A life, a promising career, had been cut short. In that moment, it felt like a small, insignificant detail, a blip on the radar of a day that was otherwise so perfect. You had no personal connection to the man, no emotional investment in his life or death. He was a name in a newspaper, a story to be read and forgotten. You remember thinking what a strange way to go, tumbling into a river after a night of drinking. A life that burned so brightly extinguished in such a sad and ignominious way. It was a fleeting thought, a moment of idle curiosity, and then you were moving on, the memory of the headline already beginning to fade. You can still recall that detail now, a century later, and it feels like a cruel joke. The memory of Eid Delahanty's death, a small, sad piece of news on a seemingly perfect day, now feels like a prelude, a quiet drumbeat before the symphony of horror began. It was a moment of triviality, a perfect example of a life that was about to be changed forever by a single, terrifying encounter. It was a life that was about to be put into perspective by a force that did not care about baseball players or small towns or the simple dreams of a boy and a girl in love. You, like everyone else in your small town, lived in a world that was bordered by the known and the familiar. The horrors that existed in the world were the ones you read about in the newspaper, the ones that happened to other people in far-off cities and distant lands. They were abstract concepts, things that could never touch you, not in the quiet, peaceful world of Leeds Point. You believed that you were safe, that the pine thickets and the salt air and the gentle rhythm of your life were a shield against the darkness. You were just a boy, holding a bag of groceries, and you had no idea that a different kind of headline was about to be written in your own life. A headline that would never make it into any newspaper. A story that would remain a secret for over 100 years. The sun was warm on your skin as you walked back to your horse. You could feel the gentle heat of it on your face and arms, a feeling of comfort and contentment. You were a boy of simple pleasures, and that feeling, the feeling of the sun on your skin on a beautiful summer day, was one of them. You untied Zip from the post, the rope a familiar coil in your hand, and you led him away from the general store, ready to start the journey home. You were already thinking about Abigail, about the possibility of meeting her by the creek in the afternoon, a small plan that filled you with a happy, youthful anticipation. The world was a good and simple place, and you were a lucky boy to be a part of it. As you untied Zip from the post outside the general store, a feeling of unease began to creep into your heart, a cold, dark feeling that you couldn't quite place. The sun was still warm and bright, but for a moment, it felt like a shadow had passed over you. A sudden drop in temperature, a brief, chilling moment of darkness. You looked around, but there was nothing to see. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, and the street was still and quiet, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The feeling passed as quickly as it came, and you dismissed it as a trick of the light, a momentary lapse in your sunny disposition. You were just a boy, a happy boy on a summer day, and you were eager to get back to your simple, wonderful life. You led Zip away from the post, the rope a familiar coil in your hand, and you were ready to start the journey home. That's when it happened again. That same feeling of dread, a deep, primal fear that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Zip, a horse of a gentle and unflappable nature, suddenly reared back, his eyes wide and wild, a panicked whinny escaping his throat. You tightened your grip on the rope, struggling to hold him steady, your own heart now pounding in your chest. Zip was skittish, his whole body trembling, his ears flat against his head. He was looking up, his gaze fixed on something in the sky, something that you couldn't see. It was an unnatural, terrifying sight. A horse that was usually so calm, now a wild, terrified animal, and your heart filled with a sense of dread that was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. You looked up, following his gaze, and for a moment you saw it. A huge, dark shadow, a silhouette against the impossibly bright sun, a shape that was unlike anything you had ever seen. It was too big to be a bird, too strange to be a passing cloud. The shadow was a fleeting moment of darkness, and then it was gone, leaving nothing but a lingering sense of terror and a trembling horse. You stared at the empty sky, your mind trying to make sense of what you had just seen, your heart still pounding in your chest. There was a sound, too, a low, guttural roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that felt as if it was tearing the very fabric of the air itself. It was a sound that had no place in your world, a sound that belonged only in nightmares and fairy tales. And you found yourself suddenly, terribly, alone with the knowledge of what you had just heard. You tried to calm Zip, whispering his name, stroking his neck, but he was inconsolable. He was shaking, his eyes still wide with terror, and it took all of your strength to keep him from bolting. You could feel his fear, a raw animal terror that was so deep and real it felt like a physical thing. You were just a boy, and you had no explanation for what you had just seen and heard. You were a boy of science and reason, a boy who believed in the tangible world of farms and pine trees, not in the impossible horrors that seemed to be lurking just beyond the edge of your vision. You were a boy who believed that the world was a safe and predictable place. And in that moment, that belief was shattered, broken into 1,000 tiny, sharp pieces. You finally managed to get Zip under control, leading him away from the general store, your heart still pounding, your mind still reeling. The world was back to normal. The sun was still shining. The town was still quiet, but something had changed. The perfect, peaceful rhythm of your day had been broken, and in its place was a feeling of unease, a sense of foreboding that you couldn't shake. You were a boy with a secret, a boy who had seen and heard something impossible, something that had no place in your world. You were a boy who was no longer so sure that the world was a safe and predictable place, and the knowledge of that was a heavy, terrifying weight on your young shoulders. The trivial news of Eid Delanty's death had been a quiet whisper, but this was a scream that you were the only one who could hear. The journey home was a blur, your mind racing, your heart still pounding in your chest. You kept looking up at the sky, expecting to see the shadow again, to hear that awful, guttural sound. But there was nothing. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, and the world was quiet, a deceptive, peaceful silence that only served to heighten your sense of unease. You finally reached your daddy's farm, your hands still trembling, your mind still reeling from what you had just seen and heard. You led Zip into the barn, unsaddled him, and gave him a few extra handfuls of oats, a small attempt to soothe his still jittery nerves. He ate them with a desperate, frantic energy, his eyes still wide with a fear you couldn't understand. Your daddy was out by the fence line, mending a broken rail, his back to you as you approached. He was a simple, pragmatic man, a man of the earth, who believed in the tangible world of hard work and honest living. He was a man who had no time for flights of fancy or ghost stories, a man who saw the world in black and white. You knew, even as you walked towards him, that he would not believe you, that he would laugh it off, that he would dismiss your fears as a trick of the light or a boy's wild imagination. You hesitated for a moment, the words a bitter, indigestible lump in your throat. But the need to tell someone, to share the burden of what you had seen, was too strong to ignore. "Daddy," you said, your voice a little shaky, "I saw something." He turned to look at you, his brow furrowed, a tool still in his hand. "What is it, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." You told him the story, the words tumbling out in a rush, of Zip's panic, of the huge, dark shadow, of the low, guttural roar. You told him of the Pegasus, with the forked tail, and a rider you saw silhouetted in the sun, a vision that defied all logic and reason. You told him everything, the raw, unfiltered terror of the moment still fresh in your mind. You watched his face as you spoke, a face that was usually so open and honest, now a mask of gentle skepticism. He listened patiently, a small, amused smile playing on his lips, and when you were finished, he let out a short, hearty laugh. "Son," he said, the amusement clear in his voice, "you've been spending too much time out in the sun. It's a beautiful day, a fine day for a ride into town, but the sun can play tricks on your eyes. A big all hawk, a few clouds, a boy's imagination. That's all it was." You tried to argue, to convince him that what you saw was real, that the fear in Zip's eyes was a real thing, that the roar was a sound that you would never forget. But he just shook his head, his smile still in place, and turned back to his work, dismissing your fears as nothing more than a boy's wild imagination. The conversation was over, and you were left with the bitter, lonely knowledge that you were the only one who had seen it, the only one who had heard it. You were alone with your secret, and the weight of it felt impossibly heavy on your young shoulders. You walked back to the house, the sun still shining, the world still peaceful, but for you, the world had changed. The perfect, predictable rhythm of your life had been broken, and in its place was a quiet, creeping sense of dread. You were no longer the boy who believed in the simple, tangible world of farms and pine trees. You were now a boy who knew that there were things in the world that defied all logic and reason, things that lurked just beyond the edge of your vision, things that could steal the very breath from your lungs with a single, terrifying moment of darkness. And you were a boy who was terribly, terribly alone with that knowledge, a boy who would carry that secret for the next 100 years. You went to bed that night with the uneasy feeling still clinging to you like a second skin. You were a boy of simple habits, a boy who fell asleep easily after a long day of work and play. But that night, sleep was a distant, unreachable thing. The image of the shadow, the memory of Zip's terror, the sound of that awful, guttural roar, it all played in your mind like a broken record. You kept your ears open, listening for any sound from the outside, any hint of that impossible thing you had seen. But there was nothing. The night was still and quiet. The only sound the soft, rhythmic chirping of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves in the night breeze. It was a peaceful sound, but for you, it was a deceptive peace, a quiet before a storm you knew was coming. You felt a sense of dread, a premonition that the day's strange events were not an isolated incident, but a prelude, a quiet drumbeat before the symphony of horror began. You tossed and turned, your mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief, and you finally drifted off into a fitful, shallow sleep. But sleep, when it finally came, was not a refuge. It was a shallow, fitful thing, full of half-formed dreams and fleeting images of that impossible shadow. You tossed and turned, your mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief, and you finally drifted off into a fitful, shallow sleep. It felt like you were teetering on the edge of a nightmare, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety that never quite let you rest. You were a boy who had never known fear, not the deep, soul-shaking fear that was now a part of your life. You had been afraid of the dark, sure, of the ghosts and goblins that a boy's mind can conjure. But this was different. This was a real, tangible fear. A fear of something that defied all logic and reason. A fear of a thing that should not exist, and that knowledge, that deep, unsettling knowledge, was a terrible burden. Your sleep was finally broken not by a dream, but by a sound from outside your bedroom door. It was your father's voice, not the jovial, calm voice you knew, but a voice of fear and urgency, a voice that was barely a whisper. You sat up in bed, your heart now pounding in your chest, your mind instantly awake and alert. You could hear other voices too, the low, urgent murmur of men talking in hushed tones, the sound of boots on the wooden floor. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and a cold dread filled your stomach, a chilling feeling that what you had seen and heard that afternoon was somehow connected to this moment. You jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, pulling it open. Your father was standing in the hallway, his face a mask of worry and fear, his eyes wide and wild. He was holding a lantern, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Other men from the town were there too, their faces grim and pale in the dim light. You saw Mr. Abernathy, the general store owner, his usually kind face now a mask of fear. You saw the blacksmith, his big, strong hands now trembling. Something was wrong, and you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that it was about to change your life forever. Your father looked at you, his eyes full of a grief you had never seen before. "Son," he said, his voice a low, guttural whisper, "Abigail never came home. Her father, he just came to the door. She never made it back from her walk. The whole town's out looking for her. We're getting a party together now. We need to go." The words hit you like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp, and unbearable pain. Abigail, the girl you loved, the girl you were going to marry, she was gone. The world, which had been teetering on the edge of a nightmare, had finally plunged into darkness. The sound of your own voice was a hollow, distant thing as you asked what everyone else was thinking. Gone. But gone where? Your father shook his head, his face a mask of grief and fear. "We don't know, son. We just don't know." And in that moment, as you looked at the grim faces of the men in the hallway, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that the shadow you had seen, the roar you had heard, was not a trick of the sun or a boy's imagination. It was real, and it had taken the one person you loved most in the world. The night was a living, breathing thing, a vast and terrifying darkness that had swallowed the one person you loved most in the world. You joined the men of the town, a grim and silent procession, each man armed with a lantern and a shotgun, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering light. The silence was the worst part, a heavy, suffocating silence that was only broken by the soft crunch of boots on the pine needles and the occasional whisper of a name, Abigail. The name was a prayer, a plea, a word that was filled with a desperate hope that was slowly beginning to curdle into a cold and bitter despair. You were just a boy of 16, but you felt the crushing weight of 100 years of grief in that moment, a premonition of the endless, agonizing years to come. You were a part of the search party, but you were also a separate entity, a ghost in your own life. You were walking, but your mind was 1,000 miles away, reliving the moment you saw the shadow, the moment you heard the roar, the moment you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that your world was about to be torn apart. You could feel the eyes of the other men on you, their whispers a constant, low-level hum in the background. They knew you were with Abigail on her walk. They had seen you together, and their whispers were a quiet, unspoken question. What happened, Everett? But you had no answers for them. You had only a secret, a terrible, unbelievable secret that you knew they would never believe. The search party fanned out, each man taking a different path, a different direction, their lanterns a scattering of fireflies in the vast, inky blackness. You followed your father, a tall, silent figure whose usual calm demeanor had been replaced by a grim, desperate urgency. He was calling out her name, his voice a low, rough sound that was filled with a grief he was trying and failing to contain. Abigail, Abigail, he would call, and the name would hang in the air for a moment before being swallowed by the silent, indifferent darkness. You would call her name too, your voice a high, reedy sound that was filled with a fear that was slowly beginning to curdle into a cold, hard anger. You were searching the woods you knew so well, the woods that had been a place of sanctuary and shared dreams, now a vast and terrifying labyrinth of shadows and secrets. The trees, which had always felt like friendly giants, now felt like silent, menacing sentinels, their long, twisting branches like gnarled fingers reaching out to grab you. The sounds of the forest, which had always been a comfort, were now a source of terror. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, a source of a new, heart-stopping fear. You were no longer in the peaceful, predictable world of your childhood. You were in a new world, a world of shadows and dread, a world where the impossible was now a terrifying, tangible reality. You and your father walked for hours, your feet aching, your throat raw from calling her name. The other men's lanterns were now distant, flickering dots in the darkness, and you felt a terrible sense of isolation, of being completely alone in a vast and terrifying wilderness. You felt a sense of dread, a premonition that this search was not a search for a girl who was lost, but a search for a ghost, a search for a memory that was already beginning to fade. You felt a sense of futility, of a desperate, meaningless dance in the dark. But you kept walking, a grim, determined march through the shadows, a refusal to give up, a refusal to believe that she was truly gone. And then you saw it, a piece of fabric a small white piece of cloth caught on a thorny bush. You walked towards it, your heart pounding in your chest, your mind screaming, "No, no, no." But as you reached it, you knew it was a piece of Abigail's dress, a small, torn fragment of the beautiful white dress she had been wearing when you saw her last. It was a confirmation of your worst fears, a terrible, final proof that she had been there, that she had been taken, that she was gone. The world, which had been teetering on the edge, finally plunged into a terrifying, silent darkness. The search party, a grim, silent procession, was now a group of men armed with a terrible certainty. The small, white piece of cloth, a fragile fragment of Abigail's dress, was proof of a horror that none of them could comprehend. They were no longer searching for a girl who was lost. They were now searching for a ghost, a memory, a terrible absence. The silence, which had been heavy and suffocating, now felt like a living thing, a vast, dark emptiness that had swallowed her whole. You stood there, holding the piece of fabric in your trembling hands, your mind reeling, your heart a hollow, empty space. The men were whispering now, their voices low and urgent, their eyes filled with a fear you had only seen in nightmares. They knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that this was not the work of a man, not the work of a bear or a wildcat. This was something else entirely. The men started to talk about the legends of the Pine Barrens, the old wives' tales you had heard as a boy, stories that you had always dismissed as nothing more than harmless folklore. They talked about the Jersey Devil, a creature of legend, a winged demon with a horse's head and a forked tail. They talked about strange lights in the sky, about unexplained noises in the night, about the disappearances of livestock, and in a few rare cases, people. They talked about it all now, their voices filled with a desperate, terrified belief. The line between what was real and what was legend had been blurred, and in the face of this impossible horror, they were grasping for any explanation, any reason, any way to make sense of a world that had suddenly and terrifyingly turned on its head. But you knew it wasn't the Jersey Devil, not the folkloric creature of local legend. The shadow you had seen was not a legend. It was a reality, a terrifying, tangible thing that had now taken the one person you loved most in the world. You stood there, a silent, solitary figure in the midst of a panicked group of men, a boy with a secret that would forever set you apart. You knew what they were talking about, but you also knew that they were wrong. The thing you saw was not a myth, not a legend. It was a winged, horrible thing, a pale man with a fork-tailed beast, and you knew, with a chilling, undeniable certainty, that this was the culprit. The men, in their fear, were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, trying to use a myth to explain a horror that was far more ancient and far more terrible than any local legend could ever be. You couldn't tell them that you had seen the silhouette of a man riding a winged horse, a Pegasus with a forked tail. You couldn't tell them that you had heard the roar, a sound that was not the sound of a beast, but the sound of something far older, far more sinister. They would not believe you. They would think you were a fool, a boy whose grief had made him lose his mind. And so you kept your mouth shut, the words a bitter, indigestible lump in your throat, and you let them talk about their legends, their fears, their desperate hopes. You were a boy with a terrible secret, a secret that would forever set you apart from the rest of humanity, a secret that would become the very foundation of your unending torment. The search continued for a few more hours, a grim, futile procession in the silent, indifferent woods. But the hope was gone. The men were now just going through the motions, a desperate, silent dance in the dark. The sun was beginning to rise, a pale, anemic light that did little to dispel the shadows. And the search party finally, and reluctantly, gave up. They were defeated, beaten down by a horror they couldn't comprehend, and they started to make their way back to town, their faces grim and defeated. You, however, had no intention of going back. You were a boy with a single, burning purpose, a purpose that was now the only thing that mattered. The rest of the search party turned back towards the town, a grim, defeated procession. Their lanterns, now unnecessary in the pale light of dawn, were extinguished one by one, and their voices, which had been a low, urgent murmur, were now a silent, mournful testament to their failure. They were men of reason and practicality, and in the face of a horror that defied all logic, they were lost. But you, however, had no intention of going back. You were a boy with a single, burning purpose, a purpose that was now the only thing that mattered. You watched them go, their figures shrinking in the distance, a small, sad gathering of men, and then you turned your back on them, and on the town, and on the simple, peaceful life you had known. You had no plan, no map, no compass. You had only an instinct, a deep, primal pull that was leading you deeper into the woods, into the heart of the Pine Barrens, into a place you had never been before. It was an instinct that was born of a terror you couldn't comprehend, a fear that was slowly beginning to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. You were no longer the boy who was afraid of the dark. You were a boy who was now willing to walk directly into the heart of it, a boy who was willing to face down any horror, any monster, any impossible thing to get her back. The woods, which had been a place of sanctuary and shared dreams, now felt like a living thing, a vast and terrifying labyrinth of shadows and secrets. And you, a small, solitary figure in the midst of it all, were a part of its terrible, silent rhythm. You walked for hours, a grim, determined march through the underbrush, your feet aching, your legs burning, your throat raw from calling her name. You pushed past the familiar landmarks, the moss-covered rocks, the twisting roots of the ancient trees, the small, winding creeks. You were a boy of the woods, and you knew this land. But this was a part of it you had never explored. You were walking deeper and deeper into a place that felt more wild, more ancient, more untamed than any you had ever known. The trees were thicker here, the pines taller and more gnarled, their branches weaving together into a dense, dark canopy that blocked out the morning sun. The ground was softer, a thick, damp carpet of pine needles and decaying leaves, and the air was still and heavy, smelling of rot and wet earth and something else, something strange and metallic, a scent you couldn't quite place. It was a place of a deep and unnatural silence, a silence that was more terrifying than any sound could ever be. You were a boy with a single, burning purpose, a purpose that was now the only thing that mattered. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in your stomach, but it was now tempered by a fierce, unyielding resolve. You were going to find her. You were going to get her back. You were going to face down whatever impossible horror had taken her. And you would not stop. You would not rest. You would not give up until you had her back in your arms. It was a promise you made to yourself, a promise you made to her, a promise you would spend the next 100 years trying to keep. You pushed on, a small, solitary figure in the vast, indifferent woods, your eyes scanning the ground for any sign, any hint, any clue. You were looking for a footprint, a broken twig, a piece of fabric, anything that could lead you to her. You were a boy on a mission, a boy who had stepped out of the known world and into the unknown, a boy who had left behind the simple, peaceful life of his childhood for a world of shadows and dread. And as you walked deeper into the thicket, you had a premonition, a cold, chilling sense that you were not just walking into the woods, but into a new, terrifying chapter of your life, a chapter that would have no end. You walked for what felt like an eternity, your body aching, your mind a vast, empty space filled with nothing but the desperate need to find her. The woods, which had been a familiar comfort, were now a vast, alien landscape, a place of deep shadows and unnatural silence. The trees were no longer a friendly presence. They were a menacing army of gnarled, twisting shapes, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The ground was no longer the soft, familiar carpet of pine needles. It was a rough, uneven terrain of tangled roots and hidden thorns, a constant, physical reminder of the pain and terror that now defined your life. Then you stumbled into it. It was a clearing, but unlike any clearing you had ever seen. The trees, which had been a dense, dark canopy, suddenly gave way to an open, circular space. But it was not a place of light and life. It was a place of a deep and unnatural stillness, a place of a quiet so profound it felt like a physical weight on your chest. The grass was a pale, anemic color, and the flowers that grew there were a strange, sickly shade of white. There were no birds here, no squirrels, no insects. It was a place of death, a place that felt like a wound in the very heart of the forest, and in the center of it all stood a tree. It was an oak, but it was unlike any oak you had ever seen. It was ancient, a vast, gnarled giant whose roots were so thick and twisted they looked like a nest of snakes. Its branches were low and leafless, their bare, black forms a stark and terrifying contrast to the sickly white of the clearing. It was a tree of pure, unadulterated evil, a living monument to a darkness you couldn't comprehend. The air around it was cold, even in the middle of a warm summer day, and you could feel a deep physical revulsion, a primal urge to turn and run, to get as far away from this place as you could. But you couldn't. A strange, magnetic pull, a terrible, morbid curiosity was drawing you closer, a single, agonizing step at a time. You walked towards the tree, your heart pounding in your chest, your mind screaming at you to stop, to turn back, to run, but you couldn't. The pull was too strong, the sense of a deep and terrible purpose too powerful to ignore. As you got closer, you could see the details of the tree. The way its bark was a dry, cracking gray. The way its branches were twisted into grotesque, impossible shapes. It was a tree that had been around for a very long time. A tree that had seen things, terrible things. And you felt a sudden, chilling certainty that it had something to do with Abigail, with the shadow you had seen, with the impossible horror that had now become your life. You finally reached the tree, your hand reaching out to touch its dry, cold bark. And as you did, you felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror wash over you. It was a feeling so profound, so deep, that you felt as if you were drowning in it. It was the feeling of a presence, an ancient, malevolent thing that was now fully aware of your existence. You pulled your hand back as if you had touched a burning ember, your breath catching in your throat, and you looked at the base of the tree, at a large, dark hollow that was half hidden by a thick, twisting root. It was from there that a sound was now emanating, a low, unnerving buzz that vibrated through the very ground beneath your feet. It was a sound that had no place in the world, a sound that was full of a terrible, terrible hunger. The clearing was a place of profound and unnatural silence, a vast, open wound in the heart of the Pine Barrens, and the tree at its center was a monument to a malevolence you couldn't comprehend. But now, that silence was broken by a sound so strange, so alien, that it felt as if it was tearing the very fabric of the air itself. It was a low, unnerving buzz, a sound that vibrated through the ground beneath your feet, a constant, low-level hum that felt like a physical weight on your chest. It was a sound that had no place in the world, a sound that was full of a terrible, terrible hunger, and you found yourself drawn to it, a terrible, morbid curiosity pulling you closer, a single, agonizing step at a time. The sound was coming from the large, dark hollow at the base of the tree, a gaping maw that was half hidden by a thick, twisting root. You knelt down, your heart pounding in your chest, your mind screaming at you to stop, to turn back, to run, but you couldn't. The pull was too strong, the sense of a deep and terrible purpose too powerful to ignore. As you got closer, the buzzing grew louder, a thick, visceral sound that felt as if it was filling your ears, your mind, your very soul. It was a sound that was not mechanical, not electrical, not even organic. It was a sound that was pure, unadulterated evil, a sound that was the very sound of a terrible, insatiable hunger. You peered into the hollow, the darkness, a thick, oily void that seemed to swallow the light. But it wasn't a total darkness. There was a light, a faint, sickly green glow that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, a light that seemed to be coming from the very depths of the earth. And as you stared into the hollow, your eyes slowly adjusting to the dim, unnatural light, you saw it. It was a nest, a vast, pulsating mass of woven roots and pine needles, and something else, something that looked like flesh, a living, breathing thing that was pulsing with that same sickly green light. And in the center of the nest, lying on a bed of what looked like white, fleshy cocoons, was a human body, a small, fragile thing that was so pale, so still, you thought at first that it was dead. It was Abigail, you gasped, the sound a small, sharp intake of air in the vast, terrible silence. Your mind, which had been a whirlwind of fear and disbelief, now went completely blank, replaced by a single, desperate thought. She was alive. The body, which you had thought was a corpse, was now moving. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through her small, fragile frame. The sickly green light, which had been a faint glow, now pulsed with a terrible, desperate rhythm, a light that seemed to be feeding on her very essence. And as you watched, a terrible, nauseating truth dawned on you. The buzzing sound, the humming, it was the sound of 1,000 tiny things, 1,000 tiny winged insects that were now swarming around her, crawling over her skin, drinking from her, a constant, low-level hum of 1,000 tiny mouths feeding on her life force. You felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror wash over you, a feeling so profound, so deep, that you felt as if you were drowning in it. It was the feeling of a presence, an ancient, malevolent thing that was now fully aware of your existence. It was a feeling of a cold, indifferent evil, an evil that did not hate, did not care, but simply was. It was a feeling of a horror so vast and so ancient that it made your own small, human fears feel trivial and insignificant. And as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew that this was not a place of myths or legends, but a place of a terrible, tangible reality, a reality that was now feeding on the girl you loved. But in the midst of your terror, a new feeling was beginning to stir, a feeling of a fierce, unyielding resolve. You were no longer just a boy who was afraid. You were a boy who was now willing to walk directly into the heart of it, a boy who was willing to face down any horror, any monster, any impossible thing to get her back. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in your stomach, but it was now tempered by a fierce, unyielding resolve. You were going to find her. You were going to get her back. You were going to face down whatever impossible horror had taken her. And you would not stop. You would not rest. You would not give up until you had her back in your arms. It was a promise you made to yourself, a promise you made to her, a promise you would spend the next 100 years trying to keep. You reached out your hand, your fingers trembling, and you touched her face, her skin cold and clammy to the touch. The buzzing intensified. The sickly green light pulsed with a desperate, hungry rhythm. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you were not just touching a girl, but a trap. The hollow, the nest, the buzzing insects, they were all a part of it. A vast, malevolent thing that was now feeding on her life. And it had now found a new, delicious source of energy in you. And as you stood there, your hand on her cold face, you knew that you had just stepped into a world of impossible horror, a world from which you would never, ever return. The buzzing stopped. The sudden, profound silence was more terrifying than the noise had ever been. A deafening absence of sound that screamed of an immense and immediate danger. The sickly green light, which had been pulsing with a terrible rhythm, now winked out, plunging the hollow back into an impenetrable, oily darkness. You were left standing there in the clearing, your hand on Abigail's cold face, your heart pounding in your chest, a small, solitary figure in a vast, indifferent world that had just become a living nightmare. You pulled your hand back, your fingers trembling, and you stood up, your eyes fixed on the hollow, your breath catching in your throat. You knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that something was about to emerge. And then it did. The ground began to shake. A low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the very soles of your feet. The tree, which had been a silent, menacing sentinel, now groaned, its ancient branches creaking under the weight of some immense and impossible pressure. The hollow, which had been a small, dark maw, now widened, the earth and roots around it cracking and splitting, as a new, terrible thing pushed its way out of the earth. It was a creature of impossible proportions, a grotesque, horrifying parody of a horse, with blood-colored, leathery wings and hooves that seemed to be made of some dark, polished obsidian. Its head, a long, equine skull with a forked tail and eyes that were two glowing embers of a terrible, terrible hunger, was now a foot away from you, and you could feel the hot, foul breath of it on your face, a stench of death and decay, and something else, something that smelled of old, spoiled meat. The beast snorted, a low, guttural sound that was more of a growl than a horse's whinny, and it took a single, agonizing step forward, its obsidian hooves making a deep, wet thud on the soft, pine-covered ground. It was a creature of a raw, primal power, a thing that had no place in your world, a thing that belonged only in forgotten lore and whispered tales. Its skin was a deep blood red, a color that seemed to absorb the light, and its wings, which were folded against its back like a great, leathery cape, were a vast, terrifying expanse of deep, oily black. It was a creature of a perfect, terrible beauty, a living, breathing testament to a malevolence you couldn't comprehend. You stood there, frozen in terror, your mind a vast, empty space filled with nothing but the image of the beast. A terrible, nauseating sight that was burning itself into your memory. It was a creature that defied all logic and reason. A creature that had no right to exist. A creature that was now standing right in front of you. A dark and terrible monument to your own impossible, unbearable fear. The hooves, which you had thought were made of obsidian, were now stomping the ground. A low, rhythmic beat that felt like a drum of pure, unadulterated evil. It was a sound that was a prelude, a sound that was a warning, a sound that was the final, terrible beat of your own heart. But it was not alone. From the saddle on its back, a figure now dismounted, a man who was as pale as the moon, with hair as black as a raven's wing. He was tall and impossibly thin, a cadaverous figure that seemed to be made of shadows and smoke. He was dressed in a suit of dark, old-fashioned cloth, and his hands, which were long and bony, were holding the reins of the beast, a thin, silken cord that seemed to be made of woven spider webs. He was a figure of a perfect, terrible elegance, a living, breathing testament to a grace that was as cold and terrifying as the beast he rode. The man, if you could even call him that, looked at you, his eyes two burning pools of a pale, inhuman blue. They were not eyes of hate or anger or even malice. They were eyes of a deep, profound indifference, eyes that saw you not as a boy, not as a human being, but as a small, insignificant insect, a momentary curiosity in a world that was far, far older than you could ever comprehend. He smiled, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes, and he took a single, deliberate step towards you. He did not say a word, but in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew with a terrible, chilling certainty that this man, this pale, cadaverous figure, was the thing you had seen in the shadow, the thing that had taken Abigail, and you knew, with an even more terrible certainty, that you were not a boy in the woods, but a lamb in the presence of a lion. A lion that had just found its dinner. The pale man dismounted from the blood-colored creature, his movements fluid and unnervingly silent, as if he were made of smoke. He was a tall, impossibly thin figure, his face a perfect, bloodless white, his eyes two burning pools of a pale, inhuman blue. He was a creature of a perfect, terrible elegance, a living, breathing testament to a grace that was as cold and terrifying as the beast he rode. His gaze was fixed on you, a long, searching stare that made you feel as if he was seeing not just your body, but your very soul. You stood there, frozen in terror, your mind a vast, empty space filled with nothing but the image of the man, a terrible, nauseating sight that was burning itself into your memory. He smiled, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes, and he took a single, deliberate step towards you. He did not say a word, but in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew with a terrible, chilling certainty that this man, this pale, cadaverous figure, was the thing you had seen in the shadow, the thing that had taken Abigail, and you knew with an even more terrible certainty that you were not a boy in the woods, but a lamb in the presence of a lion. A lion that had just found its dinner. He did not need to speak for you to know who he was. His presence was a language all its own, a language of ancient power and a terrible, insatiable hunger. He stopped just a few feet away from you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face, and he let out a sound, a low, soft sigh that was more of a hiss than a breath. And then he spoke, his voice a low, melodic sound that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. "Everett Michael Burns," he said, his voice a perfect, terrifying echo of your own thoughts. "I have been waiting for you." The words were not a question, but a statement, a declaration of a knowledge that defied all logic and reason. He knew your name, your full name, a name you had never spoken in this clearing, a name you had never thought anyone outside of your small, forgotten town would ever know. And in that moment, the last vestiges of your sanity, the last little bit of your belief in a safe, predictable world, finally shattered. The sound of your name on his lips was a confirmation of your worst fears, a terrible, final proof that this was not a random encounter, not a chance meeting in the woods. This was a deliberate act, a hunt that had been orchestrated for a purpose you couldn't comprehend. He knew who you were, he knew where you were, and he had been waiting for you, a silent, patient predator in the heart of the forest. The knowledge of that was a terrible burden, a weight that felt impossibly heavy on your young shoulders. He was a creature of a purpose, a creature of a plan, and you, a small, insignificant boy, were now a part of it. He looked past you at the hollow in the tree, and his smile widened, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that made your blood run cold. "She is delightful," he said, his voice a low, purring sound, a sound of a profound and terrible satisfaction, a perfect, unblemished flower in a garden of weeds, a rare treat indeed. He turned his pale eyes back to you, and his smile widened even further, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. "But you," he said, his voice a low, melodic purr, "you are the main course, the delicious little morsel that I have been waiting for. You are the one who will give me what I want." The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. You were not a boy, not a human being, but a meal, a morsel, a thing to be consumed. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger, a danger that had now found its way into your world, a danger that had now found its way to you. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that your world, your life, your very soul, was now in the hands of this pale, cadaverous man, a man who knew your name, and who now had a terrible, terrible purpose for you. The pale man smiled, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes, and he took a single, deliberate step towards you, his gaze fixed on your face, a gaze of a deep, profound indifference. He did not care about your fear, your terror, your desperate, silent pleas. He saw you not as a boy, not as a human being, but as a small, insignificant insect, a momentary curiosity in a world that was far, far older than you could ever comprehend. He was a creature of a purpose, a creature of a plan. And you, a small, insignificant boy, were now a part of it. He looked past you at the hollow in the tree, and his smile widened. A thin, cold, bloodless smile that made your blood run cold. He took another step. The sound of his foot on the soft ground a silent, terrible thud. And he let out a sound, a low, melodic purr that was filled with a profound and terrible satisfaction. Your little friend, he said, his voice a low, melodic sound that was filled with an ancient, resonant power, is perfectly safe for the moment. I have no intention of harming her, not yet, anyway. The words were not a comfort, but a threat, a promise of a future that was far more terrible than any immediate physical harm. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger, a danger that had now found its way into your world, a danger that had now found its way to you. He gestured with a long, bony hand towards the hollow in the tree, a gesture of a perfect, terrible elegance. She is in a stasis, he said, his voice a low, purring sound, a state of suspended animation. She is not sleeping, not dreaming, but she is also not aware. She is a perfect, unblemished flower in a garden of weeds, a rare treat indeed. And she will remain in that state until I get what I want. So you see, she is perfectly safe. The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. You were not a boy, not a human being, but a plaything, a morsel, a thing to be consumed. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger, a danger that had now found its way into your world, a danger that had now found its way to you. You stood there, frozen in terror, your mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. You wanted to rush to the hollow, to pull her out, to hold her in your arms, and protect her from this terrible, impossible man. But you couldn't. A strange, invisible force, a power you couldn't comprehend, was holding you in place. A force that was as real and as tangible as a wall of solid stone. He had you completely, utterly, and there was nothing you could do. You were a boy in a trap, and the trap had just sprung. He smiled, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes, and he took another step towards you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face. So you see, he said, his voice a low, melodic purr, I have no reason to lie to you. She is safe, but she will not remain that way forever. She is on a clock that is now ticking, and the time is running out, and only you, he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, can stop it. The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger, a danger that had now found its way into your world, a danger that had now found its way to you. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that your world, your life, your very soul, was now in the hands of this pale, cadaverous man, a man who had Abigail, and who now had a terrible, terrible purpose for you. You stood there, frozen in terror, your mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. Your throat was dry, your mouth a void of words. You wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at this man who had taken the girl you loved and was now treating you like a piece of meat, but you couldn't. The words were a bitter, indigestible lump in your throat, and your body was a statue of pure, unadulterated fear. You were a boy who had never known fear, not the deep, soul-shaking fear that was now a part of your life. This was a fear that was so profound, so deep, that it had taken away your ability to move, to speak, to even think. You were a boy of simple, honest emotions, a boy who knew nothing of the ancient, terrible evil that was now standing before you. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that your world, your life, your very soul, was now in the hands of this pale, cadaverous man. The pale man looked at you, a strange, amused look on his face. He let out a low, soft chuckle, a sound that was filled with a terrible, ancient mirth. It was not the sound of a man laughing, but the sound of an immense and terrible being enjoying the terror of a small, insignificant insect. "Oh, the Americans," he said, his voice a low, melodic purr that was filled with a profound and terrible satisfaction. So unrefined, so uncultured, so prone to displays of public emotion. Where is your etiquette, little one? Where is your composure? One would think you have never encountered a creature of consequence before. He gestured with a long, bony hand towards the beast, which was now quietly snorting and pawing the ground, its head tilted in a strange, silent curiosity. The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not just a monster, he was a condescending one. He was not just a being of immense and terrible power, he was a snob. He was mocking you, mocking your fear, your simple human emotions, your very nature as an American boy in the heart of the Pine Barrens. He saw you not as a human being, but as a cultural curiosity, a specimen of a race he deemed inferior. You stand there with your jaw agape, your eyes wide with terror, your tongue a useless lump in your mouth. He continued, his voice a low, purring sound. It is amusing, a primitive, predictable response, but I have no time for such theatrics. I have a purpose here, a plan that is far more important than your little display of fear. I have an appetite, you see, a hunger that is far more profound and far more exquisite than your simple human needs. He took another step towards you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face, and he gestured with a long, bony hand towards the hollow in the tree. "Your friend," he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, "is in a stasis, a state of suspended animation. She is not sleeping, not dreaming, but she is also not aware. She is a perfect, unblemished flower in a garden of weeds, a rare treat indeed. And she will remain in that state until I get what I want. So you see, she is perfectly safe for the moment. But she will not remain that way forever. She is on a clock that is now ticking, and the time is running out. And only you, he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, can stop it. The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger. A danger that had now found its way into your world. A danger that had now found its way to you. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that your world, your life, your very soul, was now in the hands of this pale, cadaverous man, a man who had Abigail, and who now had a terrible, terrible purpose for you. You were a boy, and you were now standing face to face with a lion that had just found its dinner, and was now mocking you for your fear, your simple human emotions, your very nature as a human being, a lion that had a terrible, terrible hunger, a hunger that you, a small, insignificant boy, were about to satiate. The pale man's amusement faded, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity that was far more terrifying than his mockery. He had finished his little performance, his little display of superiority, and was now ready to get down to business. He was a creature of a purpose, and that purpose was now focused on you. A small, insignificant boy in a world that was far, far older than you could ever comprehend. He took a single, deliberate step towards you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face, and he let out a sound, a low, melodic purr that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. "Let us get to the point, shall we?" he said, his voice a low, purring sound. "I have something you want, and you have something I want. It is a simple, elegant transaction, a bargain, if you will. You want the girl, you want your little flower back. And I," he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, "want something of a different nature, something of a far more profound and far more exquisite value." The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger. A danger that had now found its way into your world. A danger that had now found its way to you. He gestured with a long, bony hand towards the beast, which was now quietly snorting and pawing the ground, its head tilted in a strange, silent curiosity. "The old stories are so crude," he said, a look of distaste on his pale face, "so melodramatic. They speak of blood rituals and signed contracts and all manner of unpleasantries. I assure you, my little friend, I am far more civilized than that. I have no need for your blood, no desire for your soul in a jar. That is a primitive, barbaric practice. I am a purveyor of a far more refined and far more exquisite form of commerce. The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not a monster of folklore or a creature of legend, but a very real, very present danger. A danger that had now found its way into your world. A danger that had now found its way to you. "I am a collector," he said, his voice a low, purring sound. "I collect moments, moments of profound significance, moments of choice, moments of pure, unadulterated will, and I have found that the most exquisite of these moments are those that are made in the face of impossible odds, in the face of a terrible, soul-shaking fear. And you, my little friend," he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, "are about to make such a moment. You are about to make a choice that will define the very nature of your existence. A choice that will give me what I want, and in return will give you what you want." He took another step towards you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face, and he reached out a long, bony hand, his fingers a pale, skeletal thing that seemed to be made of shadows and smoke. He did not touch you, but the air around his hand was cold, a chilling, supernatural cold that made the hairs on your arms stand up. "I will give you a voucher," he said, his voice a low, melodic purr, "a small, insignificant thing that will be a testament to your choice. It will be a small, painless process, a simple exchange, a moment of your will for a lifetime of hers. You will give me a voucher for your soul, a small, intangible fragment of your very essence, and in return, I will give you back your little friend. She will be returned to you, unharmed, as if this night had never happened, and you will be free to live your life, to marry her, to have your children, to grow old together, to live out your days in a blissful, ignorant rhythm. All I ask," he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, "is a small, intangible fragment of your soul, a voucher, if you will, a promise of a future payment that may or may not ever come due. A small price to pay, I think, for the life of the one you love most in the world." The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was offering you a bargain, a deal with the devil, a choice between the girl you loved and the very essence of your being. It was a choice that was impossible, a choice that was a terrible, beautiful lie. You knew with a terrible, chilling certainty that this man, this pale, cadaverous man, was not a purveyor of moments, but a purveyor of souls. And you knew, with an even more terrible certainty, that the price he was asking for was far, far more than a small, intangible fragment. He was asking for everything. He was asking for the very foundation of your existence, the very essence of your being, the very soul that made you, you. But he was also offering you back the one person you loved most in the world. He was offering you a choice, a terrible, impossible choice, a choice between your soul and the love of your life. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. The pale man's words echoed in your mind, a low, melodic purr that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. He was offering you a bargain, a choice between your soul and the life of the girl you loved most in the world. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. Your mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief, 1,000 questions swirling in your brain. What did he mean by a voucher? What would he do with it? What would happen to you? What was the catch? Your fear was now tempered by a cold, hard anger, an anger at this man who was playing with your life, who was toying with your emotions, who was treating you like a small, insignificant insect. You wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at him, but you couldn't. The words were a bitter, indigestible lump in your throat, and your body was a statue of pure, unadulterated fear. The pale man seemed to read your thoughts, a thin, cold, bloodless smile on his face. He gestured with a long, bony hand towards a patch of ground near the base of the tree, a small, dark patch that was covered in strange, ugly-looking toadstools. The old rituals were so crude, he said, his voice a low, melodic purr. They speak of blood rituals and signed contracts and all manner of unpleasantries. I assure you, my little friend, I am far more civilized than that. I have no need for such theatrics. The contract, he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, is a simple, elegant thing. It is a moment of choice, a moment of faith, a moment of pure, unadulterated will, and the vessel for that moment, he said, gesturing to the toadstools, is a simple thing, a small, insignificant mushroom. You will simply eat one. You stared at the toadstools, your mind reeling. They were a patch of dark brown, ugly-looking things, with small, fleshy caps and thick, slimy stems. They looked poisonous, deadly, a silent, beautiful killer in the heart of the forest. You knew with a terrible, chilling certainty that this was the real test, the real catch. He was not asking for your soul. He was asking for your life. He was asking you to poison yourself, to take a leap of faith into a black and terrible unknown. He was asking you to trust him, a creature of immense and terrible power, a creature who had just mocked your very nature as a human being, a creature who had stolen the girl you loved. The audacity of it, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it, was a thing of a terrible, soul-shaking beauty. It was a test, a cruel and sadistic game, and you were the pawn. But what if it kills me? You asked, your voice a small, shaky whisper, the first words you had managed to speak since he had appeared. The pale man's smile widened, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. That is the question, isn't it? He said, his voice a low, melodic purr. That is the test of faith, the test of will, the test of love. You have to take my promise on faith. I have offered you a promise, a guarantee that if you do this, you will get your little flower back. But I have offered you no proof. I have offered you no reason to believe me. I have offered you only my word, which is an ancient, unbreakable thing. The question is, he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, you believe me? Do you believe that my word is worth the risk of your life? Is your love for her strong enough to take that chance? That is the choice, Everett Michael Burns. That is the moment of truth. The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not just a monster, he was a master manipulator. He was twisting your love, your fear, your desperation into a weapon against you. He was forcing you to make a choice between the girl you loved and your own life, a choice that was impossible, a choice that was a terrible, beautiful lie. You knew with a terrible, chilling certainty that the mushroom was not just a mushroom. It was a test of your will, your faith, your love, a test that you knew you had to pass, a test that you knew you could not fail, a test that you knew with a terrible, chilling certainty would change your life forever, whether you passed it or not. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew with a terrible, chilling certainty that you had no choice at all. The pale man's question hung in the air, a cruel and terrible thing that was more a declaration than an inquiry. He had offered you a test, a horrifying choice between your life and the girl you loved. And now he was twisting the knife, forcing you to confront the reality of a world without her. The silence in the clearing was a vast, terrible thing, a vacuum that sucked all the air from your lungs. The toadstools, which had been a small, insignificant patch of darkness, now seemed to glow with a malevolent, silent intensity. They were the key, the vessel for a choice that would define the very nature of your existence. And you, a small, insignificant boy, were now standing face to face with a question that had no answer. The pale man smiled, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes. He took a single, deliberate step towards you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face, a gaze of a deep, profound indifference. He did not care about your fear, your terror, your desperate, silent pleas. He saw you not as a human being, but as a cultural curiosity, a specimen of a race he deemed inferior. He was a creature of a purpose, and that purpose was now focused on you. A small, insignificant boy in a world that was far, far older than you could ever comprehend. Is it? He asked again, his voice a low, melodic purr that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. Is life worth living without her? Your little flower, your Abigail. You have known her your entire life. No, you have walked through the pine thickets with her. You have ridden out the storms with her. You have dreamed of a future with her. A future of a little white farmhouse, a picket fence, a vegetable garden, children who would one day run through your yard. A simple, beautiful, pathetic little dream. Is that not what you want? Is that not the reason you have come here, to this terrible, silent place, to get her back, to save her from me? The words were a direct, undeniable assault on your last little bit of sanity. He was not just a monster, he was a master manipulator. He was twisting your love, your fear, your desperation into a weapon against you. He was forcing you to make a choice a choice between the girl you loved and your own life, a choice that was impossible, a choice that was a terrible, beautiful lie. You knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that this man, this pale, cadaverous man, was not a purveyor of moments, but a purveyor of souls. And you knew, with an even more terrible certainty, that the price he was asking for was far, far more than a small, intangible fragment. He was asking for everything. He was asking for the very foundation of your existence, the very essence of your being, the very soul that made you you. Look at her, he said, gesturing with a long, bony hand towards the hollow in the tree. She is so beautiful, so perfect. A fragile little thing in a world of wolves. A world that will now, if you choose to turn back, if you choose to not eat the mushroom, if you choose to not give me what I want, will swallow her whole. The men of your town, the men with their shotguns and their lanterns and their pathetic little prayers, they will not save her. The woods, which you have always seen as a place of sanctuary, will now become her tomb. And you, my little friend, he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, will be left alone. A small, insignificant boy in a vast, indifferent world. A world that will no longer have a place for you. A world that will no longer have a purpose for you. A world without her. The words were a brutal, unforgiving truth. A truth that cut you to the very core of your being. He was not just a monster. He was a master of the human heart, a creature who understood the deepest, most profound fear of all, the fear of being alone. He was forcing you to choose between your own life and a life of unbearable, unending grief. He was offering you a choice, a terrible, impossible choice, a choice between your soul and the love of your life. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. The thought of a life without her, a life of a vast, empty silence, was a far greater horror than the thought of death, the thought of a future, of a lonely, solitary existence, a future without the sound of her giggle, the touch of her hand, the warmth of her love, was a far greater fear than the thought of poison, of death, of the unknown. He smiled, a thin, cold, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes, and he took another step towards you, his pale eyes still fixed on your face. "The clock is ticking, little one," he said, his voice a low, melodic purr. "The time is running out. The choice is yours, a life without her, or a moment of faith. A small, simple, pathetic little choice. A choice that will give you back your world, or a choice that will leave you in a vast, unending void of grief. A choice that will save her, or a choice that will condemn her. A choice that will define the very nature of your existence. A choice that will give me what I want, and in return will give you what you want. The choice is yours, Everett Michael Burns. The choice is yours." And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. The silence in the clearing was a vast, terrible thing, a vacuum that sucked all the air from your lungs, toadstools, which had been a small, insignificant patch of darkness, now seemed to glow with a malevolent, silent intensity. They were the key, the vessel for a choice that would define the very nature of your existence. And you, a small, insignificant boy, were now standing face to face with a question that had no answer. The pale man's words, a cruel and terrible thing that was more a declaration than an inquiry, echoed in your mind. A low, melodic purr that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. A life without her, or a moment of faith, a small, simple, pathetic little choice. A choice that will give you back your world, or a choice that will leave you in a vast, unending void of grief. A choice that will save her, or a choice that will condemn her. A choice that will define the very nature of your existence. The choice is yours, Everett Michael Burns. The choice is yours. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. You took a single, agonizing step towards the toadstools. Your body, a statue of pure, unadulterated fear. Your mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. 1,000 questions swirling in your brain. What if it was all a lie? What if the mushroom was a poison? A slow, agonizing death that would leave Abigail to the mercy of this monster. What if he took your soul and then, with a final, cruel laugh, simply walked away, leaving you and the girl you loved to rot in this terrible, silent place? But the thought of a life without her, a life of a vast, empty silence, was a far greater horror than the thought of death. The thought of a future of a lonely, solitary existence, a future without the sound of her giggle, the touch of her hand, the warmth of her love, was a far greater fear than the thought of poison, of death, of the unknown. And so you walked, a small, solitary figure in a vast, indifferent world, a boy who was now willing to walk directly into the heart of it all. You reached the toadstools, your hand trembling as you knelt down, and you looked at the small, ugly-looking things, their fleshy caps and thick, slimy stems, a testament to a beautiful, silent killer in the heart of the forest. The pale man watched you, a thin, cold, bloodless smile on his face, his eyes two burning pools of a pale, inhuman blue. He was a creature of a purpose, and that purpose was now focused on you. A small, insignificant boy in a world that was far, far older than you could ever comprehend. He did not say a word, but his silence was a language all its own, a language of ancient power and a terrible, insatiable hunger. He was waiting, a patient, silent predator, and you, a small, insignificant boy, were now a part of his game. You reached out your hand, your fingers trembling, and you touched one of the mushrooms. Its cold, clammy surface, a terrifying reminder of what you were about to do. You plucked it from the ground, the sound of the root tearing from the earth, a small, sickening sound that echoed in the vast, terrible silence. You held it in your hand, a small, ugly-looking thing that was a testament to a life-altering choice, a life-altering moment of faith. You brought it to your lips, your body a statue of pure, unadulterated fear. And you opened your mouth, your tongue a useless lump of terror. The taste, when it finally came, was a foul and bitter thing, a taste of rot and decay, and something else, something unnatural and alien that made your stomach churn. You forced yourself to chew, the texture of the slimy flesh a nauseating, unbearable sensation, and you swallowed, the lump in your throat a hard, bitter thing. The pale man's smile widened, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. And he let out a low, melodic purr that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. "It is done," he said, his voice a low, purring sound. "The contract is sealed." And in that moment, as you stood there, a small, insignificant boy in a vast, indifferent world, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had just made a choice that would define the very nature of your existence, a choice that would change your life forever, whether you passed the test or not. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. The world, which had been a safe, predictable place, was now a vast, unending void of shadows and dread. And you, a small, insignificant boy, were now a part of its terrible, silent rhythm. The taste of the mushroom was a bitter, foul thing, a taste of rot and decay, and something else, something unnatural and alien that made your stomach churn. You forced yourself to swallow, the lump in your throat a hard, bitter thing, and you stood there, a small, solitary figure in a vast, indifferent world. The pale man watched you, a thin, cold, bloodless smile on his face, his eyes two burning pools of a pale, inhuman blue. He was a creature of a purpose, and that purpose was now focused on you, a small, insignificant boy in a world that was far, far older than you could ever comprehend. "It is done," he said, his voice a low, melodic purr. "The contract is sealed." And in that moment, as you stood there, a small, insignificant boy in a vast, indifferent world, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had just made a choice that would define the very nature of your existence, a choice that would change your life forever, whether you passed the test or not. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you had no choice at all. The world, which had been a safe, predictable place, was now a vast, unending void of shadows and dread. And you, a small, insignificant boy, were now a part of its terrible, silent rhythm. He smiled, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. And he let out a low, melodic purr that was filled with an ancient, resonant power. "The contract is sealed," he said again, the words a low, purring sound that was filled with a profound and terrible satisfaction. "The moment of truth has passed. You have made your choice, little one, and now," he said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural whisper, "it is time to pay." The words hit you like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp, and unbearable pain. The world, which had been teetering on the edge of a nightmare, had finally plunged into a terrifying, silent darkness. The pale man's smile widened even further, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. And he gestured with a long, bony hand towards the hollow in the tree. "She is yours," he said, his voice a low, purring sound. "She is," returned. And in that moment, as you stood there, frozen in terror, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that your world, your life, your very soul, was now in the hands of this pale, cadaverous man, a man who had Abigail, and who now had a terrible, terrible purpose for you. The last thing you saw before the darkness took you was the man's triumphant smile, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. It was a smile of a lion who had just found its dinner, a smile of a predator who had just found its prey, a smile of an ancient, terrible being who had just found a new, delicious source of energy in a small, insignificant boy. The smile was a moment of a profound and terrible satisfaction, a moment of a perfect, unadulterated evil. And then the darkness came, a vast, terrible void that swallowed you whole, and you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you were not a boy in the woods, but a lamb in the presence of a lion that had just found its dinner. And then there was nothing. The world was gone, and you were left alone in a vast, unending void of shadows and dread, a void that was filled with a single, terrible thought: the man's smile, the triumphant smile of a predator who had just found its prey. And then there was nothing. A vast, unending void of shadows and dread, a void that was filled with a single, terrible thought: the man's smile, the triumphant smile of a predator who had just found its prey. The smile was the last thing you saw, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart. It was a smile of a lion who had just found its dinner, a smile of a predator who had just found its prey, a smile of an ancient, terrible being who had just found a new, delicious source of energy in a small, insignificant boy. The smile was a moment of a profound and terrible satisfaction, a moment of a perfect, unadulterated evil. And then the darkness came, a vast, terrible void that swallowed you whole, and you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that you were not a boy in the woods, but a lamb in the presence of a lion that had just found its dinner. And then there was nothing. A vast, unending void of shadows and dread, a void that was filled with a single, terrible thought: the man's smile, the triumphant smile of a predator who had just found its prey. The darkness was not a void, but a presence, a heavy, suffocating thing that was filled with the bitter, coppery taste of blood and the sweet, sickly scent of decay. It was not a physical darkness, but a mental one, a terrifying, silent vacuum that had swallowed your mind, your memories, your very soul. You were a small, insignificant thing, lost in a vast, unending void of shadows and dread. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that this was the end. You had made your choice. You had paid the price, and now you were paying the final, terrible toll, a final, eternal silence. But then the darkness began to recede, a slow, agonizing process that felt like a painful, physical wound. The bitter, coppery taste of blood faded. The sweet, sickly scent of decay disappeared. And the silence, which had been a vast, terrible thing, was slowly replaced by the familiar sounds of your bedroom, the gentle chirping of crickets, the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze, the rhythmic creaking of the old wooden floorboards in the hallway. The world, which had been gone, was now slowly, agonizingly returning. You woke up, the sound of your own gasp, a small, sharp thing in the vast, terrible silence. You were in your bed, your body a statue of pure, unadulterated fear, your mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The sun was streaming through your window, a gentle, warm light that was a stark and terrifying contrast to the cold, silent darkness of the void. You were in your bed, in your room, in your world, and it was as if the night had never happened. The memory of the clearing, the toadstools, the pale man, the blood-colored beast. It was all a nightmare, a terrible, terrifying dream that had no place in the bright, sunlit world of your reality. You sat up in bed, your heart pounding in your chest, your body a tremor of fear and disbelief. You looked around your room at the familiar wooden chest of drawers, the small braided rug on the floor, the faded wallpaper. It was all there, all the simple, mundane details of your life that you had taken for granted, all the simple, mundane details of a world that you had thought was gone forever. It was all there, and it was all a lie. The nightmare was real, the bargain was real, the voucher for your soul was real, and the memory of the man's triumphant smile, a terrible, terrible thing that felt as if it was tearing your soul apart, was a real and constant thing, a terrible, final proof of a debt that was now owed. You stumbled out of bed, your legs a shaky, uncertain thing, and you rushed to the window, throwing it open. The air was cool and clean, smelling of damp earth and the hint of morning mist, and the sun was a bright, warm light that was a stark and terrifying contrast to the cold, silent darkness of the void. You looked out at the familiar sight of your daddy's farm, the cows grazing in the field, the pine thickets in the distance, the sun-dappled glades that had been the backdrop to your young love. It was all there, and it was all a lie. Then you heard it, a sound from downstairs, a sound that was so familiar, so normal, so mundane, that it felt like a deliberate deception. The sound of your mother's voice, a low, gentle sound that was filled with a maternal concern. "Abigail," she said, her voice a low, gentle sound, "eat your eggs, girl. You've had a long night. We were all so worried about you." Your heart, which had been a small, fluttering bird in your chest, now stopped. A sudden, sharp, and unbearable pain. Abigail, she was there. She was alive. You rushed to the door, throwing it open, and you stumbled down the stairs, your legs a shaky, uncertain thing, and you saw her. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a small, fragile thing in the vast, indifferent world of your terror, and she was eating her breakfast, her face a pale, serene thing, her eyes a wide, vacant blue. She looked at you, a small, puzzled smile on her face, and she said, "Everett, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." The words, a cruel and terrible thing that was more a declaration than an inquiry, were a final, brutal blow to your last little bit of sanity. She was there, she was alive, she was safe, but she remembered nothing. The night, the shadow, the roar, the man, the beast, the clearing, the toadstools, it was all a blank. She was a perfect, unblemished flower in a garden of weeds, and you, a small, insignificant boy, were now a part of its terrible, silent rhythm. You were a boy with a secret, a terrible, unbearable secret, a secret that would forever set you apart from the rest of humanity, a secret that would become the very foundation of your unending torment. You were a boy who had made a bargain, a boy who had paid the price, and a boy who would now spend the rest of his life living with the terrible, silent knowledge of what he had done. The years that followed were a strange, beautiful, and terrifying thing. It was a life lived on two planes of existence: the sunlit, peaceful world of your life with Abigail, and the dark, silent world of your secret. The bargain you had struck, the choice you had made, had given you back the girl you loved, but it had also given you a second skin of a profound and terrible guilt. You were a boy with a secret, a terrible, unbearable secret, a secret that would forever set you apart from the rest of humanity, a secret that would become the very foundation of your unending torment. You married Abigail 2 years later, a beautiful, sunlit ceremony in the little church in town, and she was a radiant, beautiful thing in a white dress, a vision of perfect, unblemished happiness. She was a gift, a miracle, a living, breathing testament to the bargain you had made, and you loved her with a fierce, desperate intensity that was born of a fear you couldn't comprehend. She was your world, your sun, your moon, your stars, and you clung to her, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety in the back of your mind, a constant, low-level hum of a terrible, silent fear that she would one day be taken from you again. You lived a good life, a simple, beautiful life that was filled with the simple, mundane pleasures of a farmer's life. You bought a small farm on the edge of town, a little white farmhouse with a picket fence and a vegetable garden in the back. You had a horse, a few cows, a small, beautiful life that was a testament to the dreams you had shared with her so many years ago in the tops of the trees. You had children, 6 of them, 3 boys and 3 girls, and they were a beautiful, noisy, chaotic testament to your love, a living, breathing proof that the bargain had worked. You were a husband, a father, a man, and for a few fleeting moments, a few brief, shining instants, you were almost happy. But the price of happiness, you would soon learn, was a terrible, unforgiving thing. The pale man's bargain, the voucher for your soul, was not a simple, elegant transaction. It was a cruel and sadistic game, a slow, agonizing process that would take everything from you, piece by piece, until you were left with nothing. The first to go was your firstborn son, a beautiful, healthy boy who died in a farming accident. A terrible, gruesome thing that happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, that you had no time to even scream. He was gone. A small, innocent life snuffed out in a moment of a profound and terrible violence. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that this was the price. This was the bargain. The price for your life with Abigail was the lives of your children. One by one, they all went. The beautiful, healthy, noisy, chaotic children who were a testament to your love, a living, breathing proof that the bargain had worked, were now a constant, silent reminder of a terrible, unforgiving debt, a fever, a disease, another farming accident, a freak accident with a horse, a drowning in the creek you had once loved so much. One by one, they all went, a slow, agonizing procession of death that left you and Abigail in a silent, empty world of grief and despair. The house, which had once been a place of noise and laughter, was now a silent, empty tomb, a monument to a love that had come at a price you could not comprehend. You buried your last child, your beautiful youngest daughter, in the small cemetery on the edge of town. And as you stood there, a small, solitary figure in a vast, indifferent world, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that the bargain was not just for your children. It was for everything. It was for your happiness, for your hope, for your future. The pale man, the creature of a purpose, had not just taken your soul. He had taken your life, a slow, agonizing, piece-by-piece process that would leave you with nothing but a final, eternal, unbearable silence, the love, the joy, the laughter. It was all alone, a cruel and sadistic game, and now the time had come to pay it back. The price for your life with Abigail was a life of unending, unbearable grief, a life that would be a silent, constant reminder of a debt that could never, ever be repaid. The loss of your children was a wound that never healed, a constant, low-level ache that was a part of every waking moment. But through it all, you had Abigail. She was your rock, your solace, your reason for living, a constant, tangible reminder of a love that was born of a terrible, impossible bargain. You held on to her with a fierce, desperate intensity, a fear in the back of your mind that she too would one day be taken from you. And for a time, for 20 years, that fear was a silent, unaddressed terror. You and Abigail grew old together, the years a blur of shared grief and quiet moments of love. A world of two people against a vast, indifferent universe. But the pale man's bargain, the voucher for your soul, was not a simple, elegant transaction. It was a cruel and sadistic game, a slow, agonizing process that would take everything from you, piece by piece, until you were left with nothing. The loss of your children was a terrible, unforgiving payment, a brutal reminder of a debt that could never, ever be repaid. But the final, terrible toll, the last agonizing turn of the screw, was her. The girl you had loved, the woman who had been your sun, your moon, your stars, was about to be taken from you. The ailment, when it finally came, was a cruel and terrible thing. A mysterious blood ailment that left her weak, anemic, and slowly, agonizingly, fading away. There was no pain, no suffering, just a slow, gradual decay. A slow, gradual fading of the vibrant, beautiful woman you had loved. Her skin, which had been a beautiful, healthy pink, was now a pale, anemic white. Her eyes, which had been a bright, vibrant blue, were now a dull, listless gray. She was a ghost in her own life, a small, fragile thing in a world that was slowly, agonizingly, taking her away from you. You watched her go. A slow, agonizing process that left you in a world of a profound and terrible helplessness. You held her hand, a small, cold, fragile thing, and you talked to her, whispering your love, your grief, your fear, into the vast, indifferent silence of her room. You watched her fade, a slow, agonizing process that left you in a world of a profound and terrible helplessness. And you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that this was the final, terrible price. The price for your life with Abigail was a life of unending, unbearable grief. A life that would be a silent, constant reminder of a debt that could never, ever be repaid. She died in your arms, a quiet, gentle passing that was a testament to the slow, gentle decay that had taken her. Her last breath was a soft, silent sigh, a small, insignificant thing in a world of vast, indifferent silence, and then there was nothing. The light was gone, the warmth was gone, the love was gone, and you were left alone in a vast, unending void of shadows and dread. The world, which had been a place of noise and laughter, was now a silent, empty tomb, a monument to a love that had come at a price you could not comprehend. You buried her in the small cemetery on the edge of town, right next to your last child. And as you stood there, a small, solitary figure in a vast, indifferent world, you knew, with a terrible, chilling certainty, that the bargain was not just for your children, it was for everything. It was for your happiness, for your hope, for your future. The pale man, the creature of a purpose, had not just taken your soul. He had taken your life, a slow, agonizing, piece-by-piece process that would leave you with nothing but a final, eternal, unbearable silence, the love, the joy, the laughter. It was all alone, a cruel and sadistic game, and now the time had come to pay it back. The price for your life with Abigail was a life of unending, unbearable grief, a life that would be a silent, constant reminder of a debt that could never, ever be repaid. And you, Everett Michael Burns, a boy who had made a bargain, a man who had paid the price, were now a small, insignificant ghost in a vast, indifferent world. A world that was now a silent, empty tomb. And so you sit there, Everett Michael Burns, a ghost among giants, your story written, your soul a ghost of a ghost, your memories a vast, unending sea of grief. The words, which had been a bitter, indigestible lump in your throat for 100 years, are now on the paper, a testament to a life that was both a miracle and a curse. You have told your story. You have paid your final debt. And now, there is nothing left. The silence of the redwoods is a profound and terrible thing. A vast, indifferent presence that has been a silent witness to your life, to your grief, to your pain. You have paid the price. You have told your story. And now you are free. Free to lie down in your bed, to close your eyes, to finally, after 100 years of an impossible, unbearable life, find peace. The silence is a vast, beautiful thing. And in that silence, you finally find your rest. Sweet dreams.